The Rules Committee will come to order. Before we begin, I want to congratulate Mrs. Lesko. I hear that you, a grandmother? And what's his name? Brandon. So, baby Brandon. Well, congratulations. No. And yeah, well, that's.
Did they have a reveal party or this latest thing that they do?
The gender reveal?
I was just saying, did they have a gender reveal or?
Well, congratulations. All right, at this time, the chair will entertain a motion from the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Del Saunier. That's you. You're still distinguished, yeah, even though you're from California.
And he's certainly from California.
Yeah.
You want to put that to a vote?
Is your mic on? Is your mic on? Okay, thank you.
Don't call me distinguished again. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee report a structured rule for consideration of H.R. 4863, the United States Export Finance Agency Act of 2019. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate on the bill, divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking member, minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 116-36 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the provisions of the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report accompanying the resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report. It may be offered only by a member designated in the report and shall be considered as read. It shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subjected to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for the division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. The rule amends House Resolution 6 to extend the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress until the conclusion of the 116th Congress. The rule provides the House Resolution 661 and the House Resolution 693 are hereby adopted. And the rule provides that a motion to discharge House Concurrent Resolution 70 shall be in order on November 21, 2019, if offered by Representative Gabbard, with 20 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by Representative Gabbard and an opponent. Finally, the rule provides that the provisions of Section 7 of the War Powers Resolution shall not apply during the remainder of the 116th Congress of the House Concurrent Resolution 70.
All right, you've heard the motion from the gentleman from California. Is there any amendment or discussion? Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin with an amendment, and I do have one I want to start with, but 10 to 1, I mean, come on. I think we missed a tremendous opportunity here to make this bill bipartisan. This bill could very easily be bipartisan. The 2 Lucas amendments alone, I think, would have changed the whole context of the debate that we're going to have tomorrow. So, it's too bad that I think, and look, this is the cause I've been associated with it, and I will tell you, I've not made my final decision yet as to how I will vote on final passage. It would have been a lot easier if the Lucas amendments had been there. But look, you have a strong majority. You're going to win these things on the floor. I just would hope going forward that we think a little bit about giving more members an opportunity to participate. This has been an exceptionally bipartisan cause on the side of Congress to authorize this thing. We worked with you when we were in the majority to spring this out of being locked up over our own leadership to get it onto the floor, and we worked together to move it forward. So this is one where you can get a lot of Republican support. This is not a partisan issue, in my view. I mean, people will look at it ideologically from different points of view. I have no problem with that, but I see this, as I know my friends on the other side do, as a really important tool for the country to be able to compete on even footing with the Chinese. So we have no objection to that whatsoever. I just think we had a chance to make this more bipartisan in a period that is not likely to be very bipartisan between now and the end of the year. We ought to seize these things when we can. So in that spirit, Mr. Chairman,
Duly noted.
thank you very much. I would like to offer an open rule, and I do that because I do think if we consider these ideas, we'll get to a consensus. It'll pass overwhelmingly bipartisan, and even people that might lose their amendments, to a point Mr. Woodall made yesterday, I think would vote for the bill, because there's a lot in here to like. There's some things I disagree with. Frankly, I think what comes back from a conference with the Senate will be a better product in my view. But there's certainly not things here that cause me a great deal of problem. It's more the absence of some things than what's actually in the bill itself. So again, as I tell you, I just think we got an opportunity. An open rule would help us get there, so I would offer that. And in a genuinely bipartisan spirit. I'm not trying to score
No, I
points
know.
here. I think it'll help.
You heard the gentleman's amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Roll call, please.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings. No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres. Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter. Mr. Raskin. No. Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli. No. Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala. No. Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier. Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Mr. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mrs. Lesko. Aye. Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments? Mr. Cole. Oh,
Mr. Chairman,
Oh.
I have one.
okay, Mr. Woodall.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule and move to add a section to the rule that would make it in order at any time through November 21st for the Speaker to entertain motions to suspend the rules related to H.R. 553. You will remember that's the bill offered by our friend Joe Wilson that was going to become ripe for the consensus calendar back on May 16th. Now, my friends on the committee have heard me say this before, and you've heard the chairman speak to the issue before, and the issue was, let's add it to NDAA, was the majority's decision, and let's send it over to the Senate, and let's get it to the president's desk as fast as possible. And the chairman's conclusion back in May was adding it to NDAA was the fastest way to get it to the president's desk. It's now been 126 days since the House has passed the NDAA, and this completely bipartisan, 100% bipartisan issue has not seen the light of day. I couldn't have said it better than the ranking member just said it in terms of wasted opportunities and things that could be bringing people together. But I would implore my colleagues, if this had been a straightforward rule where we were making an order one idea and one idea only, I wouldn't have made the motion today to add it. But we've thrown everything but the kitchen sink into this rule. We've got H-reses added into this rule to deem them to be the will of the House that have never been discussed, not in this committee, not in any other committee, and yet we have added them to this rule. I would implore my colleagues, add this suspension authority, let the House have an up or down vote on whether we can do better for widows of United States servicemen. The members on this committee support this bill. I take it, I take the members at their word when they believed 126 days ago that when we stuffed it into the partisan NDAA that was the best path to the president's desk. Surely 126 days later, you agree with me that that was a failed effort and that Joe Wilson and the bipartisan co-sponsors of that resolution deserve better, and we can do better by adding it to this rule today. I thank the chairman.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I certainly hope the NDAA is not dead. I know it's still in conference, and I think if we want to, I still believe that if you want to get something done on the widow's tax, that is probably the surest way that you're going to get somebody to the president's desk. But, you know, unless the gentleman has information that Senator McConnell has no interest in continuing the conference on NDAA, I think if he did that, that'd be a tragedy. I mean, I know a lot of people in our military, a lot of people at the Pentagon are counting on us to get the NDAA done. So So I would, and in terms of some of the other stuff that it's in here, I don't think that allowing the diversity office to hire employees is particularly earth-shattering or controversial, or extending the modernization of, the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, which we discussed in the rules package at the beginning of the session, is particularly, controversial. The War Powers resolution that we just scheduled a date for it, because otherwise, anybody can bring it up at any time, and we all want to make sure we consider it in a timely and in a thoughtful way. So I don't, so I would just urge a no vote on this, Mr. Cole.
Yeah, I want to take the opportunity, since you brought up the Diversity Office and the Committee on Modernization, just to make a suggestion. Frankly, I don't think these things, particularly when we're not doing very much legislative, we do not have exactly a heavy week here. Things like that we could actually bring up instead of deem, I think would actually be helpful to and I say this again.
No, you know what, I don't disagree with you on that. I think, but we're moving in this direction nonetheless. But I do think.
Well, I understand this train's leaving the
No,
station, but if I don't make the point, there'll be more trains leaving the station. And I'm just saying, this is an area where we actually would be on, agreeing with one another, talking about what the institution needs. We're not doing much on the floor down there right now. This is actually a perfect time to have taken things like that, which we're deeming, which most members then, since we deem it, will never know what happens. They're just going to vote yes or no according to partisan affiliation on the rule. These are things where our two sides are working together on. We agree with you on the diversity issue. We agree with you on the modernization issue. I just think it ought to be worth a little time on the floor talking about some things we agree with and would do together, and it might even start a good habit that work to other things. So I just say that to sort of agree with my friend.
And
I think that's what he's trying to do with this amendment too. We do all agree. Why not get down there and talk about some things that we are doing and that we hope will get done for the American people? This in no way, by the way, would take this out of the NDAA conversation. Because why wouldn't we go down two different tracks on this one, as opposed to, I hope the NDA happens. You may well be right, although 126 days, I would argue had we gotten this, we might have had it by now. But regardless, this is one that we don't hurt ourselves, we don't violate any rules, we go down the same, another track together, and I think we would actually look good as a Congress doing that. So I just put that in front of you, Mr. Chairman, hoping you consider that going forward.
I think the gentleman has a good point. I think we do, especially during these difficult times. I think we need to try to find some ways that we can show that there is, even though we don't agree on everything, there's some things we do agree on. So as we move forward, we will certainly take that into consideration. But I nonetheless would oppose Mr. Woodall's. Yeah, not today. Maybe tomorrow's another day, right? The gentleman from Georgia.
I will say not to the chairman, because he has a seat at the table. I'd say to my other 8 members of the majority, because I sat where you did, and I had a great chairman, just like you have a great chairman, and we felt ourselves handicapped when we could see there was a better way, but we never got it until the train had already left the station. That's when they call the Rules Committee in, after the train has left the station. Take General Bergman's bill from Monday, dealing with veterans and veterans suicide, right? We had a recorded vote, and it was a huge bipartisan vote, but what the American people are going to see this week is not us coming together on modernization. It's not us coming together on diversity. It's not us coming together on widows in the military. It's not us coming together on veteran suicide, all of which are going to happen this week, and all of which either happen in a big bipartisan way, completely swept under the rug, or are going to happen in a totally partisan way, even though they're completely bipartisan issues, because they got stuffed into a rule instead of being considered on the floor. I would just ask my colleagues. I take the chairman. Chairman tells me, yes, we're going to do it, just not today. I get that, and I've been there. But we've got to help each other. Somebody asked me today, Rob, what's the biggest thing on your mind? I said, the biggest thing on my mind is how we get out of this bear trap that we've set ourselves in. That we are going out of our way to highlight the things we disagree about, and spending zero time encouraging the American people about the success we have together when it goes on. What's the harm in taking an extra hour out on the House floor for me to be able to be in partnership with you on dealing with veterans and veteran suicide? What's the harm in taking an hour out on the House floor to be in partnership with one another, talking about how we could do better for our veterans, how we failed them in a bipartisan way, and how we're going to address that failure in a bipartisan way? We have not given ourselves many of those opportunities. The Ex-Im Bank is yet another that could have been a big bipartisan success story. At the very least, could have been a bipartisan conversation about amendments, and we've missed that too. I never found a way to get involved early enough in the process as a member of the Rules Committee to keep the train from leaving the station. And I know Chairman Sessions worked hard to advocate for our ability to play a role in that process, just like I know that Chairman McGovern does. But it's becoming a habit, Mr. Chairman, and habits are hard things to break. It used to be a habit that we would have partnership discussions on the floor, and if you want to point the finger at some of our habits in the Republican leadership, I can join you in
I'm going to bite my tongue.
in agreeing with some of those failings. There were some failings there, but we also worked to stop hiding the light of the American people and their success as our bosses under the basket of partisanship. And this rule today will take another step to prevent us from sharing our collective concern and care for the American people with the American people through actions on the floor of the House. And I hope my colleagues will, if not today, then tomorrow, let's commit ourselves to doing better in that regard. And I appreciate the Chairman's concern and indulgence. Thank you.
The vote now is on the Woodall Amendment. I would urge a no vote and I urge that there be no coup, as the gentleman is suggesting here. So the vote is on the Woodall Amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings?
No.
Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter? Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala? Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mrs. Lesko? Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments. Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the rule. I move that the committee provide for the consideration of H.R. 3407, United States Export Finance Agency Act of 2019, authored by Chairwoman Waters, under an open rule, and make the necessary changes in the rule. Mr. Chairman, we discussed yesterday this legislation, authored and co-sponsored by Ranking Member McHenry, was the original bipartisan deal that was worked on with Chairwoman Waters. All this amendment does is allow for the opportunity for a separate consideration on the floor under an open rule to ensure all members are offered the chance to have their ideas heard. It is in no way prevents a Democratic majority from also considering H.R. 4863. And with that, I would ask for support.
You heard the gentlelady's amendment. Any discussion? Hearing none, the vote is on the Lesko Amendment. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Roll call.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings?
No.
Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter? Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala? Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mrs. Lesko? Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments. Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have amendment to the rule to make an order amendment number 1 to H.R. 4863 offered by Mr. Gonzalez from Ohio. This amendment requires certain beneficiaries of agency assistance to certify that they do not punish U.S. employees for expressing personal views on the Chinese government's crackdown in Hong Kong, its political repression of religious and ethnic minorities in Western China, or its violation of international recognized human rights.
You heard the gentlelady's amendment. Any discussion? Hearing none, the vote is on the Lesko amendment. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter? Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin? No. Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala? Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mrs. Lesko? Aye. Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
Members not agreed to. Further amendments. Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have amendment to the rule to make an order amendment number 7 offered by Mr. Barr from Kentucky, amendment number 16 offered by Mr. Posey from Florida, and amendment number 21 offered by Mr. Hill from Arkansas. Mr. Chairman, all of these amendments have one common theme: cracking down on China, whether regarding their rampant human rights violations or illegal drug trafficking. China has continued to push the boundaries of human rights violation and play by their own rules. We must take a stand against their policies that are in direct contravention with American values. These amendments give the full House an opportunity to vote on such policies and certainly deserve to be considered on the House floor. And members, I think we all agree that I tell people back home, we are bipartisan on one issue, and that is we're concerned about China. So I think this is a good amendment, and I'd like its support.
You heard the gentlelady's amendment. Any comments? All right, I'll just say one thing, and I, as the co-chair of the China Commission with Senator Rubio, I'm deeply concerned about China's human rights record. But we have passed a number of bills, including 2 bills recently, the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, overwhelmingly in the House here. We've also passed the PROTECT Act, which would cut off police equipment being sold to China or to the government of Hong Kong, and we can't get a commitment from the Senate Majority Leader to schedule it for a vote. So I think if I take the concerns here, but I would like to, we have some major legislation sitting over in the Senate that's just languishing there. I think it would be helpful, I think they would pass if the Senate Majority Leader would just schedule it. I don't know what the problem is. With that, the vote is on the Lesko amendment. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call.
Mr. Hastings?
No.
Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter? Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin?
No.
Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala? Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mrs. Lesko? Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman,
Clerk
no.
report the total.
3 yeas, 9
Members
nays.
not agreed to further amendments. Mr. Cole.
Thank you. I think this will probably be our last amendment, Mr. Chairman. I've got an amendment to the rule. I move that the committee strike Section 3 and provide for the separate consideration of HRES 661, authorizing the Office of General Counsel of the House of Representatives to retain private counsel, either for pay or pro bono, in support of the ongoing inquiry into whether sufficient grounds exist for the House of Representatives to exercise its constitutional power to impeach President Donald John Trump under a closed rule and make the necessary changes in the rule. Mr. Chairman, if we're going to do something that's consequential, we ought to do it in the light of day. It shouldn't be in a rule. I think it's appropriate to have a separate vote on this. The matter, frankly, shouldn't be tucked away and deemed a procedural matter. It's not. It's an important step in the process. We've all cast our votes for the initial process thing. If we're going to do this, I think we ought to do this in terms of how we're going to support that effort going forward as well.
I appreciate the gentleman's comment. I just want to say for the record that the Office of General Counsel, as you all know, is a small office tasked with providing nonpartisan legal assistance and representation to the entire House. And Congress has already extended them the authority to accept pro bono assistance when representing committees in court. This rule extends that authority to allow OGC staff to bring on pro bono counsel as needed to help with legal issues related to the impeachment inquiry. And I hope that we can all agree that regardless of how we feel about the inquiry, it's important to support our nonpartisan professional staff as they support the members and the committees of this House. Quite frankly, I don't think this is a big deal, but So I would urge a no vote on
Well,
municipal.
again, just with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, we think it is a big deal, and we're not arguing against the staff, and we're not arguing against the provision of support. We just simply think everybody ought to make a straight-up vote on this and go down on record this way. And so let's do it. That's if we're going to, provide for additional support or give these additional authorities, then I don't think members should have a hard time voting yea or nay as to whether or not they think that's a good or a bad idea. Put inside a rule, obviously, you don't have the same thing. You basically have a straight partisan vote. So with that, I would urge adoption of the amendment.
Voters on the Cole Amendment, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings?
No.
Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter? No. Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin? No. Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala? No. Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mrs. Lesko? Aye. Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk, report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
Is there any other amendment or discussion? Hearing none, the question is now on the motion offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Gentleman from, the roll call has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Perlmutter? Mr. Perlmutter, aye. Mr. Raskin? Aye. Mr. Raskin, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Morelli? Aye. Mr. Morelli, aye. Ms. Shalala? Aye. Ms. Shalala, aye. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. DeSaulnier, aye. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mrs. Lesko? No. Mrs. Lesko, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk, report the total.
9 yeas, 3 nays.
And the ayes have it, the motion is agreed to. Accordingly, the gentleman from California, Mr. DeSaulnier, will manage it for the majority,
And the gentleman from Georgia, distinguished Mr. Woodall, will handle it for the
and Mr. Woodall will handle it for the minority. That concludes our business, so without objection, the committee is adjourned.
You want to do it out in the hallway?
Yeah, can't do it all. Maybe we'll do it here.
Ooh, that'd be good.
Oh, let's do it. Okay.